Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our show and tell. Thank you, everybody who's dialed in. I know there are lots of people dialed in. I'm trying not to think about it, actually. This is the end of Discovery show and tell for the Barnsley Metropolitan Borough Council. I knew I was going to do that. Income Management System Discovery, which we've been doing since November. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those things. I'm going to share with my colleagues. So the first thing that we want to do is talk about our partners. So we've got a lot of partners here. Barnsley, a lot of councils. There were 5 councils who were part of the original bid with Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which is a lot easier to say when you can see it on the screen. And gov.uk pay. So I know that we've got some people who are dialed in, who were part of the research that we did. So we're very grateful for you. We've also got Peter in the room, which is excellent because Peter is one of the people who we interviewed, but we had to interview him remotely. But luckily he's come here to be with us today. So we've got quite a lot of people here. So the next thing that we want to talk about is how this came about, how the project came about. So Barnsley were in a contract with another supplier who shall maybe remain nameless, probably not, but for the moment will remain nameless. And when they found that it wasn't able to do something that they needed to do, then they asked for a short extension, and this organisation said, no, you've got to sign up for 3 years. So Barnsley decided at that point to build something. So it took them 6 months to build a really, really good service, which they've been using for the last 3 years. And so earlier on in the year, or late last year, they were part of a conversation about gov.uk pay, and it became obvious that this was something which we should explore and see if it's useful to other local authorities and other organisations. So that's what we've been doing through this discovery. So we were funded by Ministry of Health. See, I've done it, haven't I? MHCLG, there we go. Let's stick with the easy one. So we've got lots and lots of things to share with you. Here are some sentiments that people have shared with us. So here are our very attractive team. So it's a mixture of people from Barnsley and people from DXW, and we've been working together since the end of November, and it's been brilliant. I think we've had a lot of fun. We've been to see lots of people. We've done lots of interviews. So that's been really, really good. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over now to Debbie, who's going to talk to us about what an IMS is. And then we're going to share this. So as you come up for the first time, can you say who you are, where you're from, and what your role is, please? Thank you.
I might not be tall enough.
You come on the camera. I think okay, I think you'll be fine. Okay.
Okay, so what is an IMS system? So IMS stands for Income Management. It's a software solution that ensures that every penny of every single payment that comes into the local authority is allocated, verified and validated. All the information is captured and it's meaningful. It helps the council understand what's being paid, who's paid it and why they're paying it. We then allocate the money to feeder systems, so for example council tax, business rates, invoicing for any service really that the council charges for. That then allows us to update the customer records and ledgers accurately and timely. A successful IMS will positively impact on our procedures, policies, such as issuing notices for late payments, reporting KPIs, and so on. So if you've not got your income allocated timely and accurately, then how do you know what your council tax collection rate is? How do you know how you're performing? Because a bulk of your money is sat in a suspense account, unknown. Ideally, most of the processes would be automated, and an efficient and well-designed IMS reduces the need for and cost of human effort, which should also reduce the risk of processing errors. And with so many individual transactions occurring, even the smallest error can have a potential huge impact. So if money is allocated to the wrong place, somebody who's paid, their account isn't updated, so they're having recovery action taken, and somebody who hasn't paid is getting away with it because the money's gone to their account. So to get an accurate IMS system, just make sure that the council is processing and allocating everything correctly. I'm going to hand over to Marianne now.
This is Debbie.
Oh yes, yes.
And Debbie's role is?
I work in the finance team at Barnsley Council, and it's my job to manage all the income that comes into our authority and make sure that it does get allocated, as I've just been talking about.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'll hand over to Marianne now.
And I'm going to go this way too.
I think Debbie and I are tag teaming a little bit for this next section. Right, hello everyone, I'm Marianne, I'm the user researcher on this project. So I'm going to quickly take us on a little bit of a background on what we did to try and answer the research questions that we had. So we used lots of mixed methods in this, so that included things like desk research, we did workshops and interviews, and we did online surveys as well, and within that there were different approaches we took to try and explain our thinking a bit better to other people, which I'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute. So in total we had 18 different organisations, so it wasn't just local authorities, but we also had people like GDS who took part in this. But you can see we had a really nice spread around the country. So these dots here show whether they were online survey people or people we actually spoke to in person. And that was across 7 weeks. So we went around a little bit, up and down the country. So this was a mixture of speaking to our partners who we made sure we spoke to in person. We managed to speak to some other people too, which was really great. And 7 of these only did the survey, and that was still really useful because we had a lot of free text in the survey, which gave us a lot of insight into what they were thinking. And across all of these different local authorities, we covered a different breadth of the population sizes, which might have an impact on the sort of services they have to deliver and the sort of number of transactions they have to go through. So I think the highest one was Sheffield, I think that's number 4 in the country, and I think one of the smaller ones was people like Allerdale, who are a bit smaller than the rest. Okay, so this was one of our research questions. We had 2 core research questions. So what appetite is there for the Barnsley Income Management System, the IMS? And that linked to things like how do other local authorities currently handle their income management? What's the similarities or differences that we need to be aware of? What barriers might there be to adopting a Barnsley IMS, and what concerns might they have? What legacy systems do we need to be aware of? Anything else in the marketplace that they're contracted to that will also influence what happens, and other things like the Government UK Pay conversation came up a few times. Then the second question was more about how do we maintain this over time? How do we share it? How do we deliver it with other local authorities? How do we keep it user-centred? How do local authorities even feel about using something created by another local authority rather than a big technology supplier? And what's the kind of shape of the market? What do we think about the way it should be delivered, governed, maintained over time? And thinking about that benefits case for why should we be doing this? So to keep a bit of balance in what we were doing, it was really easy to get very focused on the user needs. So we had this balanced approach, sort of a Venn diagram of user needs, the desirability of the service. That's things like the expectations, concerns, what they needed to do. We had the business goals, which is more about the viability. How sustainable might it be to do this? So what does success look like? How does this fit into the wider organisation strategy? And what support is there for the proposed developments? And then we have technical constraints. So that was where a lot of the desk research came in. So what delivery models are appropriate for what we're trying to do? How might it be developed and maintained over time? What are the technologies we need to be aware of? So some of these link together. So things like what we want to do with the recommendations around technology really shaped the discussion we had about business goals. So we're starting to have recommendations. Is this something that Barnsley and the other partner councils are willing to support? Things like user needs and what people want to do influence what technical constraints are that we need to think of, because what they wanted to do with the income management system. So they're all kind of linked. And to get answers to all these 3 parts, we had a lot of different activities we did. So a mixture of interviews and workshops covered quite a few. We had some subject matter expert discussions for some of them. We have an accessibility audit, which is still in process. We're still getting the quotes back. That's something we want to do. Desk research, we had things like risk use assumptions, exercises, things like that. So you can see how it covered this broad scope of what we were doing. An IMS isn't the most photographic of things, but here are some photos of some of the activities we did. So a bit of process mapping, which the team are really good at taking the other councils through, talking about likes and dislikes, looking at the different users and how involved they are with the service. And we had another workshop again where we were doing similar things, talking about the council's experiences, and we split up into different groups. So it was really great to have the Barnsley team along with this research. And I think the people who were involved, and this was down south, I think they enjoyed being part of that too, part of that discussion, seeing that actually a lot of the things we were hearing were similar to the experience that Barnsley had had themselves and why they decided to go down this road. Right, so I won't dwell too much on this because I've already talked a little bit about the survey, but we had 17 completes from 11 different councils, which is quite a good turnout. And you can see it's around the country as well. That's who we had involved. The main outline of both the interviews and the workshops and the survey looked at three main parts. So the first one being, what is your existing income management system? What do you feel about it? What do you like or dislike? Then we talked a bit more in detail about the actual processes they wanted to do. So the survey was a lot of tick boxes. And then it was more about the attitudes and any concerns they might have to taking on an income management system developed by someone else. And with the survey responses, we had a mixture of people from IT roles, finance roles, and digital transformation roles as well. So it was a real mix of people we were talking to, which is great. Right, we're going to go into some of the stuff we learned now. This is the really interesting bit. Debbie and I are going to share talking about user needs. So I thought I'd first explain this method we use. It's called switching forces. And it consists of four parts. So we've got a push over here, which are things that push someone away from their existing service. It's the pain points they have, something they're already using. Then you've got the pull over on the right-hand side, which is more about the benefits they see in going to a new solution. So everything up here is pushing someone from their old solution over to a new service. Then on the bottom, we've got anxieties and inertia. So anxieties are the things that are quite controllable, actually. They're things that a supplier can respond to. So it's worries about what might happen in future, for example. Inertia are it's a bit harder to tackle because it tends to be things like habits or costs that are unavoidable, things like that. So we're going to go into a bit more detail about that, but I thought I'd explain what switching forces is. So I'm going to hand over to Debbie now to talk about the top part.
Thank you. So the user research that we did found out that in principle, councils are interested and are willing to move to new suppliers for their IMS. But obviously, there's got to be something in it for them. It's got to be worthwhile. It's got to be cost effective. Local authorities are looking for efficiencies and savings, and an IMS can help to achieve that. And Barnsley have seen those benefits since the IMS was introduced. The main push that people are wanting to move away from their existing system, the long contracts that they've got, the poor customer service that they've got, they've lost the trust in the systems. We found a lot of local authorities were building workarounds because the system didn't work, which was only then increasing their internal costs because they've got these manual workarounds. So that's what was pushing people to get contracts. And these are some of the quotes that we got from the surveys and the feedback. So users complained of being tied into long contracts. They were difficult to leave because of salesy tactics. So one particular example that we got was that the council only wanted to extend their contract for parking services, but the supplier refused to do that and said, well, if you want parking, you have to sign up to extend your contract for everything. Even if councils do decide to make that leap, the people that are offering an IMS solution is very limited. So they've got a market domination almost, and so they're making the decisions as to what the system does and how and when, rather than it being a customer-focused system. Most dissatisfaction from the users came from poor customer service. When people want to make customisations, make developments, all these were coming at a cost, quite high cost often, and that was making it so that local authorities were either having to not make those changes because they'd not got the budget to do so, or they couldn't project and plan because they just didn't know what the costs of change were going to be. So as I mentioned earlier, that then leads to a time-consuming manual workaround. The things that are pulling people towards better terms, they're looking for contracts that are more flexible. They wanted a better product so they can achieve the efficiencies and savings, and the time-saving features, encouraging people to try something new. Again, we've got some quotes there as to what our surveys found. One of the positives was that because we've been speaking to a lot of other local authorities, they know that the people that have built this system understand where their pain points are. They understand what type of income they're dealing with, the systems that they need to integrate with. So that came as a positive there. There were a few concerns about specific customisations. Some councils use barcodes, which Barnsley doesn't. So that would be something that might push them away, but because the system is so customised, then that is something that we could look at developing. We had a lot of feedback that it was nice to keep money within the public sector rather than outsourcing to private companies. And they thought that there would be an expectation that it would work easier with other councils because we all understand we've got a day job to do as well. And we understand there's no translation as to what exactly it is that each of them are wanting. And some users hope that they would be given more access and control to create the customisations themselves without the lengthy discussions and extensive costs, which again is something that is being built into the IMS system that we're using at Barnsley. Now back over onto the tech team.
Yeah. Thank you. I've been told to slow down, so I'll do my best. All right. Right. So talking about the anxieties and inertias now. So biggest barrier to change is the fear of the unknown, and this covered both the anxieties and the inertia side of things as well. So things like unknown unknowns, meeting legal and security standards, having a good support wrapper that comes with the service, and knowing a solution is future-proof. They were the main anxieties. So the sorts of things people were saying was, well, I think it's a great idea, but what support is going to be with it? How do we know that it will be around in 3 years' time? Because we know this isn't the normal day job for a council. So why are they doing this? Are they going to actually invest in it? So these were a lot of the questions that people had. And that's how the concerns came out, was just questions back at us when we were in these interviews. Sorry if people are getting blinded here. Is that better? Okay. So they wanted to have a bit of visibility about the development roadmap, maybe even a bit of involvement about what that might be, because they were trying to make sure that whatever they moved on to actually satisfied all their needs. They had a lot of experience with their existing supplier, that they've gone through a lot of these customizations already. So it's not a small thing to move on to a new supplier. So how do we know how that's going to work? What would the transition period look like? All these kind of questions need to be answered. But the good thing about all these concerns is that it's something that can be answered. There's a lot of things going on with lights, which is very distracting. And there's assurances we can give people about meeting those legal standards, those security standards. And it's just about being really transparent, which is not something that a lot of local authorities have experienced so far with their existing supplier. So it just lets people plan a bit better for what's coming up. So the inertia side of things, there was a bit of belief that their needs are quite unique. So how do we know that something developed by Barnsley is going to work for us? Some risk-averse attitudes going on, better the devil you know kind of thing. And just convincing stakeholders for a change, who may not be the people who actually have to use the system. They may just be connected to it in some way. Those are the kind of things that are a bit harder to change and require a bit more work from us. So these are some of the things we heard from people. So a lot of the time they might have had previous experience of changing supplier, or even just the current experience with their incumbent supplier, just left them really resistant to making any changes, because it was already taking so much time. They didn't know if moving to something different would be any better, and therefore is it worth the time and the effort and potentially the cost that goes with that. So there's this attitude that the work involved just is it not worth it. Then other things, so feeling like their needs are quite unique. How will we be able to customize what we want to do? How will that process work? And is it really an important enough process in our organisation to really work on it and to put a bit of effort into this? So some of the things we heard is deeply entrenched processes, deeply entrenched with the incumbent supplier. My concern would be any new system is dismissed before it's even given a chance. And we've always used this system. So those are the sorts of things we need to be aware of, but I don't think they're necessarily blockers. So I'm going to hand over to James.
Thank you very much. Hello. Hello, new face. Hello. I'm James. I'm technical architect at DXW. So we looked at the capabilities across different councils, across the various organisations that we spoke to, and there's a real spectrum of capability around digital and technical aspects. Some councils have none; it's all outsourced, and some are very, very hands-on with development. But those councils that were very hands-on still didn't really want to spend those sort of dev skills on an IMS. It's core and central to things, but it wasn't sort of something that they wanted to spend development time on. So even in those organisations, users had to navigate these slow and inflexible professional services to work out issues or to make systems improvements. So all these users want to be more self-sufficient, but don't have the capacity to do so, really. So as part of the research, as part of the desk research, we looked at how councils currently buy the software that they use. And there's a number of different models for that. So we identified 10 different combinations of the constituent parts of a council service. So things like, where does the software come from, and how is it obtained, who hosts it, who looks after the machines that it runs on, who supports it, who pushes development processes to improve or customize the software, and then who does the non-software stuff to make it into a process, and then who provides the end customer-facing service. And there were these 10 sort of models that we came across, covering different parts of that. All of our research participants used something close to this on-premise model, where you have the software provided by the company installed on computers that the council run themselves. And then the company, the original vendor, is also providing support and further development. So that was pretty standard for this, but there are many other different approaches. But that's not really surprising that they're all using this on-premise approach, because the market is dominated, as we mentioned, by 2 suppliers. And this is getting worse, because one of those suppliers bought a third one in 2018 and is moving everyone from that onto their own system. So the market is actually becoming less diverse. And those offerings, these 2 are very tightly integrated, as we heard earlier, with things like payment gateways, both technically and commercially, and additional features and improvements are offered as optional extras, and everything costs, basically. And the organization that needs the service is completely reliant on that vendor for hosting, support, and change and improvement of the service. So we found, of the organizations we spoke to, 15 out of 17 were using the big 2 systems. There was one who didn't, I think, and one who had built their own, excluding Barnsley. And the market share there is huge, right? It's around 88% just from this small sample, but it seems to be pretty representative of the segment as a whole. And the impact of that dominance is massive. There is no incentive on those suppliers to change. There are, again, as we've heard, poor contract terms, poor customer service, poor value for money. And the organisations providing the software tend to use bundling and long contracts to really tie the councils into these things. So it's very much a sort of captured market. What would people like it to look like, I suppose, is the next thing. So while we were doing this research, there was a discussion opened up on Twitter, conveniently, which looked at digital procurement and what people wanted from digital procurement. And it came up with around 20 suggested rules. And several of these points really mirror the insights that we've gathered in the user research. It's about not having long contracts that are difficult to exit, having assurance that data will be securely managed, that these systems will meet legal and security standards without having to pay for the upgrades to do so. And this lock-in and sort of very salesy behaviour. And this sort of list of rules and guidelines is what came out of that. And certainly the red ones here are the ones where the current suppliers are really not meeting what that audience wants around data portability, access to data, and all of the lock-in, really. So, despite lack of choice, councils do have a desire to move. 8 out of 14 who answered indicated they would be likely to change supplier in the next 3 years, and several of them are already looking at alternatives. For the ones who aren't expecting to change supplier in the next 3 years, many of them, it was just because of the length of the contract, and they're locked in. 4 of them indicated they're tied into contracts until 2022 or 23. And one suggested they'd be willing to try and end that contract early, to try and get out of it, to try something better. So there's lots of willingness to change, but there's a market with two things in. So they're going to change to the other thing, potentially. So, and then maybe change back again. So that's a problem. So we know that local authorities really value that support system that comes along with that software. But when they buy support from the vendor, they're locked in. There are other models, though, that are used in councils to procure software and services around it that give greater portability and things like that. Not in this particular subject area, but in others. So you have a range of things from the purely open source at one end, something like WordPress, which can be either self-hosted and supported, you can run the whole thing yourself, or you have a very active market of software as a service hosts, development providers. You can go anywhere and find somebody who will do some work on that for you. It's a very, very flexible market. And then going towards the lock-in end of things, you go through things like proprietary self-hosted and software as a service things from Microsoft, where again there's a good market of third-party professionals, service providers, to proprietary SaaS, where you can share some bits and pieces, but really it's that one organization that you've got to deal with, through to the fully proprietary on-premise thing that is people have so many problems with. And there are a number of organizations looking at sharing of software across public bodies. We wanted to look at what else was going on and what other models were out there. And we found a number of projects doing different things out there across the UK and across Europe. Some of these are open source code that is shared between public bodies. Some of them are public bodies that have formed a consortium to do either a commercial or open governance approach. Some of them are organizations offering commercial services around an open source core. And there are various different combinations of those that fall in different places on those models. So there are services that are being used in other ways. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Richard. There you go.
Thank you very much. This is like patting my head and rubbing my stomach in a minute. Right. So I'm Richard Kingston. I'm the IT manager at Barnsley Council. I look after the software development team that developed our IMS. And not long after they did that, I wrote a blog post about it. That was picked up by a previous Discovery project that our friends at North East Links were running. And the conversation started, and we basically ended up here today. So long old journey. We've done a lot of research in, is this week 10? 10 weeks since we really started, and we have obviously drawn some conclusions around that. Now we've done so in looking at the Venn diagram with the desirability, the feasibility, and the viability. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what we've concluded with the desirability. Hang on, patting head, pressing stomach, right, there we go. So we've concluded down of everything we heard from all the councils, all the different user needs, we've concluded them down into 23 user need statements. Now, if you're not familiar with user need statements, these are basically a way to define who a user is, what their user need is, and why that user need is important to them. So it gives us a very clear, actionable statement. When you've got 23 of them, it gives us a nice, clear direction of the problem we're trying to solve with our IMS system. So we've just pulled a few out to show you. Ooh, I worked it right. So these ones are related to control that councils feel they need. So right now, with the two suppliers in the market, there isn't an awful lot of control out there. So whenever councils want to change anything, typically they have to push back to their supplier, even little things like a report, and suppliers will typically charge them for that thing. So they don't have much control. They're having to continually refer things back. Now this links to the push and pull forces on the switching forces diagram that Debbie were talking about earlier, and Marianne. Councils want more controls of these things. So just from things like having access to my data so I can produce reports as and when required, being able to run a report from your system with your data as and when you need it should surely be a pretty standard thing, but it's not. It costs money. So one of the user needs that we've concluded down from everything everybody said is that people want to be able to do that, need to be able to do that rather. These ones relate to trust, both in the product and in the relationship with the supplier. A lot of things that we heard was that there isn't much trust at the moment in either of those things. And so changing an IMS system, if you are to move, councils consider that to be a pretty major change. It's pretty significant, and IMS is kind of central to a lot of the work that councils do. If they're going to make that change, councils want stability. They want to know that they're not going to have to make that change again in 12 months' time. It's a big deal, and it needs to be proven. It needs to stand the test of time. What they're looking for is they have needs around making sure that we have development roadmaps and that there's a commitment to a product's future and its longevity. So these are a couple of stories that replicate that. As an IT specialist, they want the IMS system to continue to be available, so they don't have to change it again. It's a big job. And as a finance manager, they want their supplier, they need the supplier to be responsive to legislative changes so that the system keeps updating itself and is always on top of the rules. They don't have to move to another supplier because this one gets out of date. And then these ones, importantly, are linked to support. I think Saul will talk about in a minute that councils value their support services. There are clear needs around this. Just handing over to them Barnsley's IMS software and saying, there you go, have fun. And it will be so much fun. It's a great system. It's not enough on its own. As finance staff, finance officers, they need help if something goes wrong. If some numbers don't tally up, if they've forgotten which button to press, if a report hasn't come out right, they need somewhere to go. They need an avenue to, whether that's picking up the phone or logging a service desk call to get some kind of response quickly. And as IT managers, they need the same. If the system falls over, if it's slow to perform, if some data doesn't come out in the way it's supposed to come out, who do they ring to get the system back up and running when they've got their finance officers wanting a quick response? And I'm going to hand over to Saul on the support part.
So I'm Saul Cousins. I supported James on this project, thinking about some of the technical business stuff. As I think you're picking up, our research showed that those dominant suppliers of councils' IMSs have highly bundled software. So they put all this stuff together. The software is the beginning of it. They wrap that in concentric bits of other services to bundle all this stuff together. We drew this diagram. We call it the onion because it's onion shaped. Also, it makes you cry. The stuff that that we kind of broke down on that model, we wanted to try and pull apart. So as Richard said, releasing that software as an open source code would allow multiple suppliers to provide the support services. So we can decouple the software from the support mechanisms that go around it. That would increase the portability of the data. People can move from one supplier to another much easier, reducing that cost of changing suppliers dramatically. Using those models that James, or those examples James moved about, if you build your website on WordPress, you can move to another WordPress hoster or another WordPress support company. You don't have to change the software or the data underneath it. It becomes much easier to move. You can pick up each of these things separately. Kind of break down those bits of that onion and go through them a little bit and some of the stuff that we worked out as we're going through this. So that's the hosting. Where does this thing go? Cloud hosting is the obvious choice. The use of on-prem makes things difficult. We're seeing many more councils adopting cloud hosting. We have some particular issues around cloud hosting for this data. It's sensitive data. It needs protecting well. It's likely to need integrating with other council systems, and that integration will have to go over the secure network. So there's a need to VPN between any cloud hosting solution and any on-prem that still exists within the council. That kind of suggested to us that a multi-tenanted solution is probably not the right way to go, because that means to say that all of those VPNs need to plug into the same system, and what we probably want is multiple systems. We also had a conversation around whether a serverless architecture might be the way forward. Lots of this stuff seen and lines up with serverless, but more importantly, the cost models might well line up with serverless. But that only starts to make sense when we get scale, when the cost of re-engineering is outweighed by the savings of the hosting costs. So some thoughts on how it might be hosted in future. This support thing that we keep going back to, it is expressed, that councils do express the need for that support, for somewhere to go to find out answers and stuff. They want to move more towards self-serve. Doesn't mean to say that they won't need to escalate when issues come outside of their area of competence. Sometimes that area of competence can be quite low, so some of them may not be all that confident in using spreadsheets to manipulate data, for instance. So that barrier, or that sort of that bar to when support might need to be provided can be fairly low level stuff. It's not all development work. Development. This support of developing things, yes, the self-service, the self-configuration should all come out of the box, so they're much more self-capable, but there are things that we're expecting many councils to want to be able to do to develop the products further. So stuff where they want customization, stuff that uses the APIs on the Barnsley IMS to integrate or to pull out special things. And again, councils will want a formal arrangement around that. They want the confidence that somebody is going to be able to provide that for them. Technical services, these are going to the stuff that Richard talked about when the data doesn't come out right. Who do you use to investigate issues that you're seeing with your data? It could be an ad hoc report, for instance, or something very bespoke. One of the most interesting things we found during the research, though, was this thing about service and product governance. We expected at the beginning that there would be some interest from some of the partners, if not the wider community of councils, to have some control over how the product would develop in future. They expressed a great deal of frustration about that, but not necessarily the want to control it. So the lack of transparency and unpredictable costs are all kind of related to this thing about the way a product is governed. The keeping up to date of the platform, the removing of reliance on legacy bits of code. There was somebody mentioned in our interviews that it still required them to have Silverlight installed on their browsers. Silverlight is no longer supported by Microsoft, so that causes tension elsewhere in their estate. One of the greatest things, one of the bigger things we heard though was that the suppliers did not understand them and their changing needs. So that wish to see better governance and product development was expressed through, we have to pay for every upgrade, and everybody has to pay for every upgrade to do things that are the same across the whole of the local authority landscape. That was seen as a real big frustration. However, the other thing we heard was IMSs are not strategically important. They're not something that they want to get involved in this stuff. They want this stuff just to work properly. They just want the supplier to understand them, to upgrade their stuff, keep them up to date, and understand what their future needs are. They don't necessarily want to sit on a board and decide what development needs to happen next. That was a really interesting thing that we found. I'm going to hand over to Zoe now to talk about some of the other stuff.
Hi, I'm Zoe Cosby. I'm from Barnsley from IT, and I helped to develop the IMS. While we've been doing this research, we've had discussions. We've identified that there's 4 key points that we need to consider to make the IMS more open and easy to use. 2 of these items were already on our backlog to do, and they're easy to implement. So what we need is a screen for creating and editing the imports and the exports. Currently, if Debbie needs a new file importing, she passes the file to us and we update the import process. What we really need is for a user to be able to do this themselves if they want to, so that they can create the interface using a screen. These can be give them the ability to specify the file types, the locations, along with the record layout, and map the data to the fields within the systems. What we also need is a screen to add import conditions. When a customer pays straight into our bank account, some people just put council tax on the reference field and expect us to know where the money should be credited to. When this happens, the money goes into suspense and Debbie has to figure out where it needs to go. For repeat offenders, we can add import rules to our interface, and the next time it happens, the system will automatically know where the payment should go and it'll post it to the right place. Currently, Debbie has to pass us a list of these for the repeat offenders and we add them to the system. But what she really needs is a screen so she can do it herself. We're going to do these two things anyway, so they're already in this backlog. The other thing is chip and pin devices. Barnsley Council decided that we wanted to close those counters and push customers to pay digitally or set up direct debits. Some councils will still take payments face-to-face, which requires a chip and pin device. Somehow we need to integrate these payments with an IMS so that they can update the accounts automatically. But the main problem is the security around capturing these card details and making sure that they're encrypted and secure. There are PCI DSS considerations to look at through these, and making sure the card data must be transmitted away from all of the network traffic, so that this is another issue we've got to explore. ATP, we currently integrate into our call centre solution to take automatic telephone payments. Other councils will have their own setup with their own IVR solutions in their contact centre. We might need to integrate to these. We'll have to look at how we're going to do that. But we have a meeting with GovPay and they're looking at providing an ATP solution as part of GovUK Pay. So that would be the most ideal solution. And now it's Marianne.
I think a lot of the good points around this have been made as we've gone along, but I'll take us through a little process we went through. So we think with Barnsley's IMS that there's a huge potential to disrupt the market, because as we heard, there are two main suppliers and there's no real encouragement or incentive for them to do anything differently. So by continuing on with developing this IMS, might encourage them to do so. So one of the exercises we went through was to think about the benefits or the overall impact that we might get into by offering something different. So it starts off over on the left, looking at the user pains, just some of them, it's not all of them, but the main ones that we heard from people, thinking about our response to those, what the outcome of that might be, and then later on what the overall impact could be. On the right hand side, we also looked at some of the strategic objectives at Barnsley, some of the vision and behaviours that they want to work towards, and we also looked at what the local digital declaration is trying to do as well, which is why they funded it as a discovery in the first place, I imagine. So things like delivering better value for money, challenging the technology market are things that this is definitely aligned with. So if I go into just a couple of examples of what this might mean. So the first one being tied into long contracts is something we heard a lot. They like the bundling as well. So one of the responses might be there's an open source option. That means that there's more flexible contract lengths. That's flexibility and control for local gov. They can move on when they want to. They've got control of their data. And in the end, that might mean that some of the incumbent suppliers, so Civica, Capita, people like that, they might be a little more incentivized to be a bit more competitive and think of something a bit different. So that would be a really nice win for this. So the objective isn't for everyone to start using the Barnsley IMS, but actually to encourage the existing suppliers to do something a bit differently and do a bit better. Another one that we could look at is things like the difficult process in requesting functionality and changes. So we heard a lot of the time for people who didn't particularly have IT support in-house, that when they wanted to make some of these requests, like we heard with Debbie having to pass Debbie lists of things to do, it can be quite a difficult process just to get these functionalities changed, and that can take quite a lot of time. They've seen a dip in the service levels, so someone might come in for a day to do something and then they leave, and then people are left with fixing the rest of the problems. So an option we could do as a response is a marketplace of plugins generated by the community. So it's not just Barnsley creating these things, but it could be other local authorities with these capabilities too. That means that local gov can more easily share their code and developments with each other. There's going to be common things across councils. Some councils will use some things, some will use others. So there'll be a bit more of a marketplace, so a bit more similar to like WordPress, for example. And that might lead to more consistent standards and processes across local government overall. So as people start aligning on similar ways of doing things, because this was one of the things that people thought was their processes are going to be slightly different to someone else's. But in the end, they're all trying to achieve the same goal. So that was one of the exercises we went through. I'll leave it on screen a bit longer, but we do have a printout here today. For people listening remotely, that's not too useful. Right, we had a little look at the numbers. So this is the costs in a year for maintaining an existing IMS. So it's not just the cost of things like minor upgrades and major upgrades, which won't happen in the same year. We sort of assumed alternate years, but it also takes into account the time required from different members of the team. And so that amounts to about £92,000 to £125,500 a year, depending on what type of upgrade they're doing. And it includes things like some of these unplanned customisations they have to request, which can cost £5,000 to £6,000 a time or more. But a lot of the cost actually came from people's time too. So when we extrapolate that to be across the 343 English councils, that represents about 31.6 to £43.1 million. So not a small amount of money. So that's a useful thing. We haven't quite gone through the exercise of thinking about what any potential savings might be. That's something to be addressed. This goes into alpha, but we can see there's an amount of money there. So in our survey, we were actually asking people about whether they were willing or interested in moving supplier in the next 3 years, which James went into before. We had 8 out of 14 said that they were interested, which is a potential of 196 out of the English councils who might want to move over. So it shows that there's an appetite for doing some of this, and here's numbers that go with it, I suppose. All right, so hopefully what we can do if we move on, and I think we're going to talk about with the roadmap, we might be able to provide better sort of value for money, stop these salesy tactics, and stop people feeling like they're a bit exploited. We heard the word cash cow banded around quite a few times. So I'm going to hand over to Richard now and go into that in a bit more detail.
So what next? That's a good question. Yeah, what next? So we've done, as I said earlier, a lot of research in a very short amount of time. And we have drawn a lot of conclusions and made quite a few recommendations. This is our roadmap for what we want to do next, what we think is the right thing to do next. We're currently doing a discovery project, which is to the left-hand side of these columns here. Typically, agile projects will follow this discovery, alpha, private, beta, and then live model. In a discovery stage, we research the problem. We research as much as we can and try and understand what it is we're trying to solve. In an alpha, we then prototype solutions to that problem, and we try different ways to solve the problem and see which ones work best. And then in the beta, we look to build the right solution and actually start to make it a reality. So we could, at this point, do another discovery. We could meet more councils. I think Marianne said we'd seen 17 through the survey, and a wider groups we've interviewed and taken part with face-to-face. We could do another discovery project to interview more councils and perhaps ask more for more information, but we don't expect the results of that would change. The things we've learned to this point with the councils who have taken part, I think they're pretty much, we'd end up with the same findings. So what we're proposing instead is that we move on to an alpha, that we work with a small group of motivated councils. There were some we spoke to during discovery who were really keen to work with us on this and take it forward. We'd like to, in that alpha, prototype solutions to everything that's all covered, disaster in the room. So we'd like to prototype offers, basically, options for dealing with all of the things that Saul talked about. So how would we manage the development of the product if we took it forward? What would a good development model look like? How would we manage the support organisation around that? How would we govern ourselves to basically take it forward? There's a lot of elements to that one that we need to put options forward for, and we need to test those. So we test those with this small group of councils and see which ones would work best. That then would lead us nicely, we think, onto a beta, where we could do with the same small group of councils a private beta. We could actually onboard them onto those prototypes, the best prototypes, the solutions, and then ultimately move to a public beta where we open things out and invite other councils to take part as well. I'll scroll my notes on here. So all of this works towards the same kind of vision. So we want to get our IMS out there in the open, in use by councils, providing benefits to councils. That's the vision, that it's out there and it's giving benefit. We ideally want the current suppliers to take note and become more competitive and do something different than they're doing now, because everybody we're speaking to says it's not working, it's not good. We'd like to do the thing that Saul talked about with decoupling the support arrangements, and perhaps we can have a setup like WordPress where lots of different organisations could offer the wraparound support that goes with the product, but the product itself can be available either open source or as an independent thing. And that would enable councils to change their support provider without necessarily changing the software, which has some big wins in it based on everything we've been told. And in all of that, we want this thing to become, or we have a vision of this thing becoming self-sustaining. We're conscious that budgets change, politics change, staffing changes. Barnsley won't always be in the position it's in today. And so we don't want to be in a position where the IMS system is reliant on Barnsley and everything that Barnsley has to keep it running. We want it to become its own self-sustained offer in the marketplace for everyone to use. And as part of that, we'd like to help define a model of how other councils could do that. We're not the only council developing software. We know, for example, at the moment, Cambridge, I think, don't mind me saying, doing a similar discovery project around a Ventax system. Can some of the learnings we've had here and the model we're looking at for taking this forward potentially be reused there? Could we end up with a marketplace that has a local government developed IMS and a local government developed Ventax system, and we can all kind of learn and benefit from each other, which would ultimately lead to, hopefully, more innovation in local governments. If the models are there and there are software teams out there in councils, perhaps more can be done and other systems can be brought forward. Thanks. Which I guess just leaves us open for any questions, but not all at me because I'm the only one still here. To the room.
Right, what we'd like to do is we'd like to actually come. Oh, no, there's
Something from this.
Let's put the lights back on. Everyone who is remote, you should have received an email from me yesterday giving you a link. So the link is menti.com, menti.com, and then there's a number that you should type in, which I have now moved off my screen. So bear with me while I just sort that out. And the code is 367997. If you have any difficulty, get in touch with Imran, who's on the Zoom thing. Thank you. That's the one. So people in the room, what I'd like to invite you to do is think about any questions that you've got, and then we'll get you to do the same thing so that we've got equality across the piece. So if you can get your phones out, please. And the URL that you need is menti.com, and then I'll give you the code in a minute. Dave, you've not got any questions?
It's not going to phone.
It's menti.com, and then the code you put in is 367997. And so you should see this, which is our beautiful sticker that you'll all get one of coming and contributing. Well, sorry, what you said. Taking something over. 367997. 367997. I like to make things complicated. Okay. So we have some questions. We have a question that says, "How are you?" Fine, thank you. It might not seem it, but right now, yeah, good. So if you'd like to type any questions you've got in, and then we can speak to those. So what I'll do is I'll have a think about the question that I have. So I have a question for the Barnsley people. Can you tell me what it's been like working on this? Be honest. Apart from today.
In front of everyone else.
Yeah, but I think it's been really nice from our point of view.
Really good choice.
Cool. And also I'd like to embarrass Peter and ask Peter, what was it like when we were interviewing you?
It's pretty straightforward. the questions were logical and helpful. And led me across what was required. Yeah, so it was quite straightforward.
And come over there. And also beneficial enough for you to get up and get on a train at 7 o'clock this morning to come and be with us. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right, I don't have any other questions. So does anyone have any questions for me?
My biggest question, what was that number again?
Okay, I'll tell you what, we'll abandon that idea for now. That doesn't seem to be working.
You've got some questions.
Oh, they? Okay. Maybe I'll borrow someone else's device. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone who has the, can I borrow your phone?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's all working beautifully. So the first question here is, did you find anything that really surprised you? So did anybody feel surprised? I don't think so.
I was surprised.
You were surprised.
I was surprised. I was surprised at how all of the people we talked to wanted somebody to take this problem away from them. It wasn't something that was close to their heart. It's a really important part of a council's business. If it stops working, then the council stops working. It has no way to be able to get money in and know what's doing. It can't talk about how it's going to spend money. It's got no idea about whether it's spending too little or too much money. But they don't necessarily just want somebody to take that problem away and solve it for them. They don't want to deal with that problem. The other one I was surprised at was the tales we heard about the suppliers and the level of service they were getting. I don't want to say too much about that, but it was astonishing the level of poor service that councils are receiving and putting up with. There was a council who talked about a server upgrade which took their income management system out for 3 days. So these are planned outage for 3 days. In the world I've been in the last 10 years, that is just unheard of. A 10-minute outage would be something. Why do we need a 10-minute outage? But a 3-day outage is ridiculous. So those are my surprising things.
Thank you. That's not quite 5 nines, is it? 3 days. Anybody else surprised by anything? One of the things that we found, so James did a lot of desk research, and I was quite surprised that no one else was doing anything like this. So you found something in Spain, didn't you? But we didn't find anything that was quite like this. So we're unique, I think, in a good way.
We need a road trip to Spain to see what they did.
Yeah, I agree. We'll ask Eggley later if she will fund that. Your phone's gone off. So one of the questions was, having done this, what do we think the future is for local digital government? That's a really good question. Does anyone have any opinions? The few. Oh yeah, I know you've got lots. I'll give one of mine.
Yeah, it's Dave Robinson. I'm IT director at Barnsley. So obviously I had to sort of promote this project with our senior management team to get it off at ground, which reflected on Saul's sort of sentiments earlier. There's quite a lot of reticence about that because it is just a core system that kind of does what it's told most of the time, despite problems that you have with suppliers and things like that. In terms of future for collaboration, this is basically why we're doing this discovery process and hopefully the alpha and beta after it, because we know that we're all trying to solve what are a massively high percent of the same issue with little margins on edges that are different. So we're kind of wanting to find out what the barriers are to collaboration. So it's difficult to say what is the future of it, because I don't know where its shape is. I just know that there has to be one, because as the numbers said there, if it's £30-odd million on what's a pretty small beer system in grand scheme of things, if you scale that up across other core systems that we all use, numbers will run into hundreds of millions. So, you know, even from a simple financial perspective, it's got to have a future. Simple as that.
Lovely, thank you very much. And my answer to that is collaboration. Always more collaboration. So we recently did another project Marianne was involved with MHCLG on collaboration. And also I was speaking to Imran earlier on, who is a community manager in DEFRA. Is that your current title? Yeah. Communities leader in DEFRA. And he's really interested in helping to get some kind of community going in this space. So he'll need lots of help to do that. So we need to actually make it a thing. Have we got any more?
Yes, there's quite a few actually.
Do the team think that the looking local service wrapper approach is inevitable to get around some of the continuity issues and something?
And give assurance.
Give assurance. Thank you. Have you got an opinion on that?
I can go first. Somebody else?
Has anyone got an opinion on that?
Probably have the best answer.
Oh.
There you go.
I don't think it's the only model. I don't think it's the only model for all bits of software. I think there are bits of software where it is worth building the support capabilities in-house, where there is a great deal of change needed, and when there's a strategic advantage in that change, then the ability to do that change and adapt it should be nearer to the organisation. For the IMS, I think that I think the conclusion we came to, and I'm not sure it was said loudly and clearly enough, is that we do need a dual model even for IMS, that we need to provide it as an open source piece of software so that others can pick it up themselves, and if it's important to them, then they can build things on it and they can change it themselves, so that there can be a marketplace of people who run the services around it. As well, so both of those, and the third one is so that those councils who don't want it close to them can have that service wrap, can have all of those things around it. Looking Local is one of the people we did find who were doing similar things to this. Oh, you're trying to point the camera at me now as well. Looking Local is one of the other ones. There were a couple others, Place Cube, Gavin's in the room, I think Guy's on the call. Who are doing some interesting things in there. The bit that concerns me most about that model is what's to stop the market driving those types of suppliers to behave like the existing suppliers. Those suppliers have got there for reasons, because they've been driven down on costs, and therefore they can't invest in innovation and all those things, or they won't want to invest. So how do we make sure that we don't drive the suppliers out there who look like they are in a better shape to provide a better service, or at least to give alternatives? Don't push them into the same corners that kind of suppliers have been pushed into.
Cool.
Has anybody else got an opinion? Please.
There's another question here. What's the preferred operating model for IMS across early adopters, and what support from MHCLG GDS is needed to make this happen? Okay, so what's the preferred operating model? James, do you want to answer this? Yeah. Since Saul doesn't want to answer anything.
Saul doesn't want to answer. So, yeah, I think what Saul was just talking about, just alluding to there, this dual model of open source available for anyone to work on. I think that's where we'll get the early adopters. You know, having a few the sort of first adopters come in and help shape that service sort of during alpha and beta would be I think where we would start, and then building up that service wrapper around it with other organizations or whatever. So it's going to be that kind of hybrid approach. As for what support is required from GDS and MHCLG to do that, I'm a technical architect, so no, somebody else can answer that bit better than me. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking now at whether we are intending to make a bid for an alpha project and some resource from MHCLG to support that. We'll be putting the applications together for that shortly and hopefully moving forward with it. We do want some support from GDS when we look at what they're doing with their current ATP discovery and how that's going to pan out, because if we are going to be able to support an automated telephone payment option, it'll be really helpful if theirs comes to life, because then it's centralised and it's there with GovPay, so it's all much easier to integrate with and work. we need to do a little work with them as part of the alpha as well, just to integrate our IMS with GovPay itself to take card payments and do the actual taking of the monies. At the moment, our IMS is running in Barnsley and it's integrated with our payment provider, which is Barclaycard SmartPay. So we want to lift that out and look at putting GovPay in there instead. So if we can do some work during alpha with GDS with the GovPay team in particular, to look at integrating those two things, I think that'll really open up where we can take that forward.
One thing to add in terms of the support, I think it needs support to build the community around this, to sort of have a push to get lots more people involved, to incentivize it. One of the things that people said during the research was that they'd really like the money to stay in public service, and I think doing a bit of a, using that as a way of incentivizing participation in this could be something that sort of story maybe needs to come from somewhere else, somewhere in the middle, or at least back up.
Thank you. This is probably one for you, James. We need to learn the lessons of the open source projects from e-government days. They need active communities to stay alive and develop with strong ownership and governance. What might this look like?
That's a very large question.
Yeah, I know.
I think that is a huge part of the question for Alpha and for the next stages, is to work out what that looks like. Building working open source projects that have lots of contribution and people involved in, it's a non-trivial task. So again, it needs support. It needs people pushing in. It needs a story around that this is something that we want to do as a public sector. That there is, there's backup. You will get the backup if you want, if you're going to have your organisation involved in this, you don't have to make the case yourself. The case will be made by other organisations as well. But yeah, I think getting that model right about how the project governance works, and obviously the funding model and things as well. That's definitely something we're going to have to dig into in a lot more detail in the alpha.
Thank you. Every time we get down to one question, someone asks another one. I'm not going to ask that one. I'm going to ask that one. Yeah. So thanks for the Place Cube shout out, by the way. Wonder who that one was.
Got another one.
Do Barnsley colleagues feel they want to get into the world of software support and provision? Not those ones.
That's a very good question. I'm looking at you, Dave. I mean, we have a software development team. We are developing software for the council at the moment, and we are supporting and maintaining that software, and we're doing that agile and iteratively. And everything we build is has the potential to be offered to other organisations. So our IMS was just the first. We're working on a number of other things that we could potentially do the same thing with. The point you make about the models and how we support this and how we move it forward, we don't have endless capacity, so I don't necessarily think we can get into that world of just becoming a software support team. We have a job to do, we have a council to support, but there is so much benefit in us making these products available that it almost feels wrong not to do something and not to put something out there. I don't know that answers the question, but it's as good as it's getting.
Yeah. We're also working on other code sharing projects with Croydon and other councils, and I know there are some people on the call at the moment. And we have asked some questions about, what is the model for these things? So there are lots of things, and it's happened more in central government about sharing platform related things. It would be really, really great, wouldn't it, if local authorities were able to do that, because you are doing the same thing. When we talk about central government, we've got to kind of take it down a level, so people are doing casework or something like that, but you are literally doing the same, well, not all of the councils because there's different levels, but a lot of the same things are being done. So I think it would be really, really beneficial. Okay.
I think in terms of councils running support and things like that, I mean, yeah, that's not, you didn't join the council to do that, right? So I think, but it's about unbundling that marketplace and opening it up to have other organisations able to provide those services around it, getting to that kind of community and marketplace of support services and other things. It's what we want to stimulate anyway.
Thank you, James. And the last question for now. What do you see as the key cultural, behavioural or values changes that are needed from local gov teams to succeed with this type of approach as provider or customer, which is really, really interesting to look at it from both those perspectives. So has anyone else got opinions on that? I know Saul has, but... So we've spoken to lots of people. People have been really, really great at giving their time, considering that they're incredibly busy. So it has been quite difficult to be quite to do some of the things that we wanted to do. We would have liked to have got people together a lot more. We would have liked to see more people in our show and tells. So I think people are really time poor. So I think that's one of the things that we need to consider. How do we make this something that's accessible for people? I think people would like to share. Most of the people that we've spoken to think that it would be really beneficial. So I think there's that, we're really starting from a very base level of finding you know, getting people to trust each other and to feel that there's going to be something beneficial coming out of the thing. You know, if you're going to give up your time when it's so scarce, you've got to really believe that something's going to come of that. So I think that the thing that we've been speaking about the community is probably a really good starting point, and working with our colleagues in other councils who are doing similar things, just trying to. Dave's sitting forward. He looks like he's got something to say. I'm going to hand over the speaker. Bear with me. Oh. Bear with me.
Go wait for it to connect.
So I just shout.
Smartphone connected.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of behaviours wise,
Two things really. We need to be a little bit less risk averse. And I think we need to acknowledge that we do employ subject matter experts. It's really easy to believe that paying £1,000 a day for something guarantees that they'll be fantastic. And it doesn't in our experience, it's fair to say. So I think you have a little bit of faith as well in people's expertise. Simple stuff really. So,
Excellent. Saul's wants to say something.
So there was something that I saw in this project, which I think we need to see a great deal more of, and that is the not just the willingness but the eagerness to share that we've seen from Barnsley Council. It's recognising that they've built something and it's of value to others, and therefore those other people should have it. We haven't push this project in the direction about recouping investment. It seems that the money that has been poured into building Barnsley's IMS has paid them back in making their systems more efficient and not having to pay a supplier to do it. But the costs are sunk, they're gone, so that's been spent. So we could have spent the whole of this project looking at how to sell this IMS. But we didn't, because Barnsley aren't thinking like that. And I think it is that attitude to know that in order for good things to happen, people have got to start doing good things. So, and that's something that I've seen throughout the project from the people I've seen in Barnsley who have given an awful lot here.
Okay, 2 more questions for now. Off the back of the software support question, perhaps MHCLG could fund Barnsley to do this on behalf of other local authorities, or maybe test this in alpha. I think it's fair to say that that's what we're intending to do.
Yeah, we hope that will be the case. I'm looking at Egg.
As long as we get some funding, yeah. Okay, that answers that one. And what do you think about the existing major suppliers shifting and becoming key support organisations for new open source systems? Would that be a positive development or just recreate current problems? Did you hear that? Ooh. I think it's fair to say that one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is disrupting the market. And if we can get organisations to behave differently and think about their customers and their customers' needs, then that would be a real benefit. And I think, we've talked about splitting things up, breaking things up, but that's one for them to think about, I guess. There are definitely other people in the market, and I had a conversation with Gavin at local gov camp. When was that? Long time ago. Yeah, local gov camp. So that was a long time ago, and he was very interested at that point. And I'm sure there are other just as nice people who would be interested in doing this kind of thing. So I think yeah, there's the incumbents, and hopefully it will affect change there. And James is creeping towards me, which leads me to imagine that he's got something to say.
I was going to say there was something Rich said at the beginning of the project, I think, which is we want to know that we're worried that the big integrators might just take this and sell it back to us. And I think what we've explored through this kind of has sort of addressed that question. If they do and they give you some value, you win, right? It's better. So I think it's all part of a functioning market, I think. So yeah.
And if they do take it and they decide to put a support wrapper around it, the big companies that are doing this now, and they don't do a good job of it, you won't buy it from them. You'll take that support wrapper from somebody else who is doing a good job of it. So the first time we broached the subject of open sourcing what we'd done, that was the immediate panic. Oh my God, they'll just take it and sell it back to us. But if we do decouple the software from the support, then the software is the software. It does what it does, and it will keep doing what it does. Where the value is then is in buying your support from a provider that's going to do a good job of that. And if they don't, you move to another provider, and you move to another provider, but your software doesn't change. You don't have to rip out your IT systems and put another one back in. So actually, I think there's a lot of benefit in that happening even.
I think one of the other things that we talked about a lot are the lengths of the contracts. And so again, if they're providing contracts that have got really very long lengths, and they're still not providing a great service, then someone who's prepared to say, we're going to do it month by month or something like that, because we trust that we're going to provide a good service, then hopefully that will work. Again, there'll be a lot of working out whether that's the thing to do or not. We've run out of questions, and I think it's probably about the right time to stop. What I'd like to invite the people who are on the phone to do is if you could type into Mentimeter. I'm going to change the slide. There we go. So you should now see a slide that says Barnsley IMS Discovery comments. If you can put any comments in there that you have about what we've done today, anything that we could do better the next time we do it, not on this project because the discovery will be finished at the end of the week, sadly, but the next time we do something, that would be really, really beneficial. Thank you. I'd like to invite the people in the room to have a look around. There are a couple of posters. So over there's one that says liked, lacked and learned. So and there's some post-it notes around. If you could put some comments on there, that would be really useful for us. We will be sharing the slide deck. So if you're thinking, I really wanted to see what all those post-it notes say on the switching forces, you can do that. There's lots of really interesting quotes and things that people said. And so that would be really useful for you to do. If you have any other questions, you all have my email address. Please come back and let me know and we'll answer them as soon as we can. So thank you very much for everyone's attention here in the room and on the call. So we'd like to say thank you and help yourself to any remaining food. Sorry, people on the call, just the people in the room. And we hope to speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.